e oltre che su Twitch ovviamente, e quindi un saluto a tutti ragazzi. Ciao Sanshiro, ciao Alps, ciao Mario, Davide, Rubik, Deinon, ciao Motenai, Sebastiano, ben trovati, ben trovati. Buonasera a tutti, soprattutto a Chris e Lord Mars. Grazie ragazzi, grazie. Sì, ho bisogno di sentirmelo dire più o meno in ogni live questa cosa. Fino a quando non la farò questa cosa non sarete contenti, vero? Beh, magari sarà uno speciale di qualche tipo, che ne so, no? Ho preso PS5 proprio per Demon's Souls Remake. Sì, lo so, e non sei stato l'unico, e questa è una cosa piuttosto diffusa in realtà. È stata una di quelle esclusive PS5 che ha effettivamente attirato molte persone, non tantissime, nel senso che non è uno di quei prodotti mega di massa, però comunque ha attirato parecchio. C'è Universo, Motenai, ben trovati ragazzi, ben trovati. Manuel, che sta qualità incredibile. Beh, sono le live che faccio sempre. DJ Trespolo, buonasera, benvenuti ragazzi, benvenuti a tutti. Come state? Domanda di rito, che state giocando di bello in questi giorni? Dai, aggiornatemi. Io, senza che ve lo dico, sto tritando Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, e sto andando anche più lento di quanto avrei voluto purtroppo, però sto assolutamente cercando di spingere per giocarlo il più possibile, e quindi io sto facendo quello. Al momento sto giocando Bundle Tale, lo sto detestando. Davvero? Davvero detestando? Io l'ho provato e sembra davvero tanto carino. Sono gli stessi sviluppatori di Graveyard Keeper, e Graveyard Keeper l'ho assolutamente adorato. Final Fantasy VII, ok, grazie, complimenti veramente, grazie infinite. Mi è arrivata oggi la Deluxe Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, yeah! Grazie mille. Grazie a Sanshiro e Sebastiano per le trasmissioni consecutive, grazie di cuore. Ora come ora lavoro, vabbè, ci sta. Final Fantasy Rebirth, eccetera. C'è anche lo showcase di No Rest for the Weekend, ma sono 2 ore e mezza. Fai live extra, me lo guardo dopo senza di voi. No, ma non vediamo tutto quanto lo showcase, assolutamente no, anche perché non ho fatto in tempo. L'avrei voluto vedere in live, ma purtroppo non è stato non è stato possibile. Lo devo ancora recuperare ragazzi, e ne parleremo comunque nelle news. Più grande di quello che pensassi, sincero, però tanta roba. Sì, decisamente, è gigantesco. Il Bonvo, grazie mille dei likes ragazzi. Inizio del male, ma ti assicuro dopo qualche ora il gioco diventa un loop di grind che arriva a darti alla testa, alienante. Ok, allora anche Graveyard Keeper è così da certi punti di vista, però ha delle soluzioni, ok? Nel senso, ti tiene sempre impegnato in qualcosa. Però deve essere pensato bene, e infatti, cioè, se poco qualcosa va storto è la fine. Deinon, grazie mille delle trasmissioni consecutive. Prepariamoci alla Chris e Lord Mars in forma. Assolutamente sì. Sì. Senza dubbio. Senza alcun dubbio. Quando è che ci farai una canzone su Sailor Chris? Non penso che avverrà mai. Forse. Non lo so. Vediamo, mi pare difficile. Comunque vedo che state giocando in tanti a Final Fantasy VII. Io, come vi ho detto, lo sto tritando in separata sede, però c'è veramente tantissimo da registrare, veramente tantissimo. Sto giocando gli Uncharted, non avendoli mai giocati. Ciao Darko. Ok. Bene, hai da recuperare, perché sono 4 più spin-off, quindi effettivamente è parecchia roba. D'accordo, allora ragazzi, come sapete negli ultimi giorni c'è stato uno spike enorme tra i licenziamenti, e di questo ne abbiamo parlato. DJ Trespolo, grazie mille della sub, grazie mille dell'abbonamento su YouTube, grazie di cuore. Voglio guardare un tuo video, ricordate, è uno da consigliarmi tra i tuoi. Basta che vai sul mio canale e ne trovi. Ci sono le news, le news pressoché giornaliere, e più... ecco, recentemente ho pubblicato la canzone. A proposito ragazzi, com'è la canzone? Vi è piaciuta? L'avete vista? L'avete sentita? Se non l'avete sentita, recuperatela anche adesso mentre sono in live, perché tanto dura meno di 3 minuti. Dario, grazie mille dei likes. Sì, Final Fantasy VII è un'esclusiva. Temporale, però è un'esclusiva. Assolutamente. Comunque, per chi lo vuole sapere, chi mi ha beccato adesso su YouTube, perché sto cominciando a fare le live anche verticali su YouTube nel feed degli shorts. Io mi occupo principalmente di videogiochi, di news videoludiche, approfondimenti, recensioni e cose del genere. ok? Però ogni tanto pubblico anche delle cose alternative, tipo le canzoni o cose tipo queste. Ma bomba la canzone, buonasera Enric, grazie Albs. Bene, 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 sono contento che vi sia piaciuta. Ah, Davide, grazie mille della sub per 10 mesi, grazie, grazie, grazie di cuore. Figurati boss, ho meritato un mentatino un botto negli ultimi tempi, soprattutto che ne ho bisogno. Grazie di cuore, grazie, grazie. Donica, ciao, grazie, cercavo qualcosa non fosse in news, do un'occhiata. Ok, allora di quello troverai qualcosa sul mio canale, e il mio secondo canale ovviamente ha le serie complete, che sono tutti gameplay, o le live che vedi adesso sono tutte archiviate lì. Ciao Luigi. Tecnicamente mi avete sorpreso? Vabbè, lo faccio di lavoro, ragazzi, nel senso che o meglio è stato il mio lavoro fino a pochissimo tempo fa, quindi sì, diciamo che è il mio punto forte. Sì, e non è l'unica canzone, ne arriverà un'altra, ragazzi. Ne arriverà un'altra che è praticamente finita, mancano un po' di cose. Ora mi dedico un po' a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, quindi per qualche giorno sicuramente mi dedicherò a quello e a trovare i ritagli di tempo per rimettermi a pari con le recensioni, che piano piano lo sto facendo, ne sto pubblicando una ogni tanto per rimettermi a pari, e poi però ce ne sarà un'altra di canzone. Ciao Arson, ma solo qualità, va bene, grazie. Buonasera, tipo SERATE, vero? Esatto. Ciao Robby. Va bene, come sapete mi sto anche liberando dall'insonnia e sono veramente felicissimo di questo. Ciro, ciao, ben trovati ragazzi, ben trovati a tutti, quelli che si stanno connettendo adesso. Ciao Baldox, buonasera. E quindi niente, è effettivamente una cosa che adesso sto prendendo un po' più di petto, fare le canzoni, ok? E ne voglio pubblicare di più. Non è che perché mi aspetto chissà quale il risultato, come avete visto anche l'ultima canzone pubblicata, cioè faccio di più con le news, ok? Banalmente, che mi ci vuole 1:30/2 a fare ogni giorno. E niente, la canzone vi assicuro che mi ci saranno volute una ventina d'ore. Casual Gamer, ciao. Quando un duetto con Cristina d'Avena non scabbia ovviamente, perché anche quell'altra mica fa schifo, voglio dire. No, Baldox, non ti sei perso niente, abbiamo cominciato adesso. Posso farti una domanda? Certo che sì, vai. Che in the game, ciao. Benvenuto. Sono contento, il gioco di Iron Man di Black Panther sono salvi, mi dispiace per il gioco su The Mandalorian. Già. Dato che stavamo parlando di mega licenziamenti, giusto? Dopo Sony è stato il turno di EA. Anche EA ha licenziato il 5% dell'intera forza lavoro. Purtroppo è un taglio molto importante. Salve Sergio. Ciao Stefano, buonasera, ben trovati ragazzi. E quindi sì, purtroppo insieme ai licenziamenti di solito ci sono dei tagli anche ai progetti. E la conferma è appunto il fatto che è stato cancellato il progetto su The Mandalorian, che però a quanto pare era nelle primissime fasi, quindi non è che abbiano perso chissà quanto tempo o soldi. Certo è che era Respawn, ok? Quindi diciamo che è uno dei team migliori di EA, e quindi insomma quelle cose costano, no? Ecco, però niente di paragonabile secondo me a quello che è successo con Naughty Dog, che lì veramente sono volati milioni di dollari completamente incendiati, secondo me. Ti trovo su Twitch? Certo che sì, siamo in live in questo preciso istante. Cosa pensi del remake di Metal Gear Solid 3? Ancora non lo so, lo voglio vedere più da finito, se ne sta andando, lo voglio vedere più da finito, ok? D'accordo. No, Metal Gear è il remake. Di nuovi Metal Gear ho qualche dubbio, però se vedono che riescono ancora a far funzionare il franchise faranno qualcos'altro. Occhio che se ne sta andando la telecamera. Oh mio Dio, dove? Ripigliatela. Sì. Come messo formato c'è oggi sono in live simultaneamente un po' ovunque. Sanes, ciao, grazie mille del follow, benvenuto. Pareri su Nacon Connect, ho visto qualcosa, è uno di quegli eventi tra virgolette minori, sono state dette un po' di cose, non è niente di particolarmente estasiante, però ci sono stati un po' di aggiornamenti, alcuni prodotti interessanti. Io da appassionato non riesco a trovare un motivo per rigiocarlo. Beh, non vuol dire che essere appassionati non vuol dire dover rigiocare per forza sempre gli stessi giochi, Si può fare anche altro, si può approfondire la lore, si possono fare tante altre cose. Non è obbligatorio sempre rigiocare alla stessa maniera al gioco. Per Insomnia non scherza, adesso anche loro... Insomniac non scherza. Vediamo cosa faranno per i DLC di Spider-Man, anche i prossimi giochi come Venom, Wolverine, nuovo Ratchet Clank, anche il gioco sugli X-Men. Ovviamente a me preoccupa più Venom, visto che esce l'anno prossimo. Attenzione, attenzione, sono tutti rumor, sono tutti rumor. E sono anche abbastanza vaghi. Sono anche abbastanza vaghi e quindi finora non abbiamo conferme. Sì, lo so che c'è stato quel mega leak, però guardate che i piani cambiano, Probabilmente già solo per il leak che è arrivato hanno cambiato qualcosa nei piani. Se poi ci rendiamo conto del fatto che i piani cambiano in continuazione nelle aziende, vi rendete conto che non potete farci troppo affidamento. Che ne pensi del DLC di Elden Ring? Cosa ti aspetti? Dovrebbe essere qualcosa di molto sostanzioso, ok? E lo si vede un po' anche dal prezzo e anche dal tempo che ci hanno messo a svilupparlo. Dovrebbe essere un bel pezzone in più. Lux, buonasera. Come stai? Io piuttosto bene in questo periodo. Sono impegnato adesso, sto facendo tante cose, però energia, quindi sono molto contento così. Alex92, grazie mille del follow, benvenuto. Giocato Soma, un vero gioco strano. Quello purtroppo non l'ho mai giocato. Dark Force Remastered, cosa ne pensi? Onestamente non lo so. Bisogna vedere. Bisogna saperne di più. Al momento è difficile dirlo. Ho visto No Rest for the Wicked, nuovo trailer molto Souls più Diablo. Sì, già. Però sì, allora è molto Souls, sicuramente. E l'approccio isometrico, attenzione però, perché non è Diablo. Diablo è un action RPG veramente isometrico, molto veloce, cioè con orde di nemici eccetera. Questo invece sembra avere l'approccio proprio Souls nei confronti dei singoli nemici, anche quelli più piccoli, quindi va preso con una certa tranquillità. Il che infatti mi preoccupa, perché come forse sapete se mi seguite, io decisamente non gradisco i Souls o i Souls-like, e quindi vedere che Moon Studios, uno dei miei studi preferiti, che ha fatto uno dei miei giochi preferiti di sempre, ovvero Ori and the Blind Forest, adesso ha fatto un Souls-like, mi crea una sorta di crisi esistenziale. Sto giocando dopo che l'ho visto su YouTube Batman Arkham Origins, è bello da giocare, il combat system non è legnoso, per esempio legnoso è Asylum. Vabbè, Asylum ha anche i suoi anni, quindi diciamo che ci può stare che col passare del tempo le cose vengano migliorate. Sì, ma la Scabbia non cantava le sigle di Sailor Moon, solo cantato con sconosciuti tipo Mustaine. Sì, sconosciuti, esatto. Ma proprio Mandalorian dovevano chiudere. Evidentemente il progetto non valeva tanto la pena. Quindi purtroppo è questa la realtà. Dai Cedro, buonasera. Buonasera. Oggi ho veramente fame, ragazzi, madonna. Dopo sto continuando la mia, chiamiamola terapia, diciamo, non mangiando, e questa è... diciamo che è tosta. Luigi, grazie mille le trasmissioni consecutive, grazie. Allora ragazzi, il documentario dura un'ora precisa praticamente, e quindi io direi che possiamo cominciare subito. Abbiamo fatto un po' di chiacchiere, un po' di introduzioni, ma adesso direi che è il momento. Quello che stiamo per vedere è, vi stavo dicendo durante l'anteprima, il documentario su Demon Souls. Ok? Fatto da NoClip, che è un canale che fa molti documentari videoludici, anzi è principalmente quello il contenuto, e non l'ho ancora visto e volevo vederlo insieme a voi, che penso che sia una bella cosa. Quindi noi adesso ci cuffiamo per benino, ecco qua, mutiamo la musica di sottofondo, eccoci, vai, tutto schermo, e eccoci qua. Allora, prima di qualunque altra cosa, ovviamente questo è il canale di NoClip, mi raccomando andateli a seguire perché fanno veramente tante cose fighe, ok? Ed è un canale che vale assolutamente, a cui vale assolutamente la pena essere iscritti e anche abbonarsi, insomma supportateli, hanno il loro Patreon per diciamo finanziare i documentari che fanno, ed è qualcosa di molto figo, d'accordo? Ora, vai, passiamo a vederlo insieme. Pronti? Allora, i sottotitoli in italiano sono con traduzione automatica, ma non sono sottotitoli automatici, quindi è la traduzione dei sottotitoli in inglese, quindi dovrebbe essere abbastanza affidabile.
Since NoClip began, there have been a number of studios and game series that we are consistently asked to investigate, and one of the most common requests is the work of From Software, specifically their disconnected series of action role-playing titles that we've come to
Ciao
refer
Nico.
to
Ok,
as
sì, ho
the
corretto il
Soulsborne
titolo, mi
games.
sono scordato a
But
cambiarlo.
From Software is one of those studios who prefers the games to speak for themselves. So while on a number of occasions we've reached out to them to talk to them about those games, they've always politely declined.
So when 2020's Demon's Souls for PlayStation 5 was released, we saw an opportunity, not only to dive into the design of these games, but to make good on another common request, to explore the unique work of Bluepoint Games, the studio in Texas responsible for some of gaming's most faithful remakes.
Ah, Bluepoint Games
this
in
video
Texas,
is going to cover
okay.
a lot, from the technical work that goes into mirroring a game on a new console,
Quanto
the
è
redesign
bello.
of various areas, bosses, the use of
Vabbè, io
sound,
detesto
the
il gameplay,
responsibility
però
of creative
il
license,
gioco,
and
cioè,
much more. Before we
graficamente,
tackle all of that,
performance è
let's take a look at
eccezionale.
how we got here.
How Sony's Japan studio, who worked with From Software on both Demon's Souls and Bloodborne, came to have a relationship with Bluepoint Games, the studio in Austin, Texas, with a pretty solid track record of remaking PlayStation classics.
There's been a long history between Sony and Bluepoint, going way back, and particularly between Bluepoint and Japan Studio. They really are the masters of the remaster, and they've taken several of our internal titles and made wonderful remakes from them. From Gravity Rush, Shadow of the Colossus, and now obviously Demon's Souls. We always wanted to do Demon's Souls, but the problem was that I don't think any of us thought we could tackle such a PlayStation classic or a PlayStation gem until we saw the amazing job that Bluepoint had done on Shadow of the Colossus.
Anche quello veramente rifatto
go ahead
in
and the
maniera
inspiration to say,
impressionante.
okay, let's really go for this one and make Demon's Souls.
So yeah, our pickiness really comes from the fact that we really want to enjoy the games we work on, right? We want to make sure that no one else can screw them up. So we basically want to like grab the games that we're most fond of. Yeah, I mean, like it
Bella
happened on the
questa.
back of our heads.
Li facciamo noi perché non ci fidiamo di nessun altro.
Knowing, you know, that Japan Studio was responsible for that IP, that one, as soon as that name came out, we're like, yes, that sounds like an amazing project for Bluepoint to do. That's something we could get behind. You know, everybody is excited about it.
Especially after finishing up Shadow of the Colossus. And we felt like on Shadow of the Colossus that we pushed our studio to a new height and accomplished new things and grown our art department and, you know, starting to look more at our design department.
Il technical director di Bluepoint deve essere uno con due palle grosse più o meno come due palloni aerostatici.
As different titles get thrown around, what about this title? What about that title? The minute Demon's Souls came up as an option, you know, I remember being in the conference room with our leads group and sitting around the table and talking about like, okay, we think Demon's Souls is going to be the title. And it was just like the excitement in the room. It felt like a great fit because it was like, here's a title that's big in scope that can utilize our team. It will force us to grow even further than where we've gone and allow us to do better stuff than we were able to do on Shadow of the Colossus. We live by this sort of mantra that like we're only as good as the last title that we published or that we released, right? And so when we look at, you know, the Uncharted collection, we feel like at the time the Uncharted collection
l'avevo
pushed
completamente rimosso.
Right? And it was a lot of work to get 3 titles through the pipeline and to basically bring all 3 up to the same sort of level. And then going to Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus was a whole new hurdle for us. But it pushed us beyond what we needed to do for the Uncharted collection. And so with Demon's Souls, we knew whatever we did next, we wanted to be bigger and we wanted to push ourselves as a studio to build more content to put into it, to refine more content within the game. And so it was just the scope of the game really led to the strengths of our studio to basically say, we've been building our technology to work with these remakes in a more elegant fashion. We've been enhancing and growing our art team, looking at our design staff, our concept art, everything else, and how do we utilize those departments and how do we continue to have them grow and flush them out? And Demon's Souls was just that title that felt like, here's something that is really cool that a lot of the studio can get behind. There's a lot of fans in the studio. The concept of the game, the genre of the game, everything is just, it was a no-brainer.
Bluepoint Games are responsible for a very unique type of game design. A craft where they are responsible for not only making older games feel modern, but doing so in a way that doesn't alter the core feel of the game. To reach their objective, they must battle player expectations, heartfelt nostalgia, rose-tinted glasses, and foggy memories. So I was fascinated to learn how they tackle such a unique and challenging task, especially given that this wasn't the first time they'd done it. What processes do they have to capture the feel of an original game? How do they create the foundation on which they can rebuild Demon's Souls?
I feel like we take a bit of a
Quello è l'unico boss che ho
sconfitto.
sconfitto. No, non è vero, ho sconfitti 2 di boss di Demon's Souls.
One way that you could do it is just, I've got a copy of the game playing on my PS3, and now I'm just going to look at it and visually try to interpret everything and basically recreate the game from scratch. You could do that, and there's most definitely
giocato un
games
Souls,
that do,
nonostante possiedo Demon's Souls per
it's a
PS5,
dangerous
posso iniziare da
perspective.
quella. Se ce l'hai,
There's a lot of
provalo.
interpretation that goes on.
Non costa
The way
niente.
we like to structure stuff is to basically
È un gioco che va approcciato con molta calma.
That the original game developer delivered to, say, in the case of Demon's Souls, for the PlayStation 3. And we take that package, and from there, we're able to extract all the data.
Singolo
The other thing we look for is
l'ambientazione è
all the
sempre
source
simile, almeno per
code.
me.
Now
Allora,
there's certain things
sì,
like
un po'
if
sì.
we don't have certain libraries, or
È
things like that,
effettivamente
we can
una delle
balance
cose
and
che
say,
alla
if
lunga
we don't
stucca anche
have
un po',
the physics
un po' anche
engine,
me.
we can look
Ma
at it and say, oh,
siccome
well,
è
we are
figa,
going to upgrade the
comunque,
physics engine and replace
l'ambientazione,
it completely
uno
anyway.
è
Certain
comunque
rendering
contento.
things, we're going to replace
Il problema
all
è il
the
gameplay.
rendering pieces of this game, so we don't need those. But when it comes to the gameplay, that's where I feel like we have this innovative approach where we take the gameplay pieces of the code base and we're able to basically plug those and integrate those into our engine. So what that gives us is it gives us this really cool balance.
Stiamo guardando il documentario su Demon's Souls.
Modern day, at this point, PS5 AAA engine that's we then connect in with the original gameplay of the original game, sort of merge them together, and then we're able to take the original content and process it a bit to basically get the game up and running. And so our first step is we just want to get the original game up and running in all of its original glory and flaws and get that up and running on the console. And then from there, then we start digging deeper and we start looking at let's extract all of the content off of the disc version and how do we get that into artists' hands? So how do we take the levels that are there and the models and the characters and the bosses, how do we extract all of that, get that into Maya so our art staff can start to work on it? A lot of these projects, take Demon's Souls, that's a 10-year-old project, 13 now. It was 10 years when we started it. And so you go back to somebody and you're like, what did you do 10 years ago? If you go and ask me, what did I do 10 years ago? I got to go look at a calendar or something. I don't know, let alone have a digital history of what I did. And so a lot of times we go back and we're like, well, what kind of resources do you have or processes do you remember of how you built this game? How did the game get in this sort of shape? With Demon's Souls, it was really cool because they actually had some decent archives. And from there, you could sort of see, well, here's a concept art, or here's multiple concept arts that they provided based upon where they were going with it. And so that really helps our art staff and our concept design a lot because they're able to look at what was their train of thought that they were going through when they built this. And so when we look at a PS3 model and it's missing detail or we have to interpret the detail, we're then able to not just look at that one model, but then also look at their concept pieces and other things to basically extract and try to figure out, where were they going?
We try to get the guaranteed data, the thing that's shipped on the disk, right? That's our starting point. So we try to extract that data out of the package, or back in the day, we would get it directly from the disk images, right? Back in the day when we were doing remaster, it was more important, right? Because you needed to get the actual data that was on the disk to then improve it. But we'd always, if source data is available, we always try to use the best that's there. So then we actually had comparison processes where we had, okay, here's a texture we extracted from the disk. Here is a source texture that we believe should be the same, but due to texture compression or other things like back in the day, palletized textures were really, really common, which aren't a thing anymore, but you'd have textures limited to 256 colors. Source textures don't have that limitation. So we did image analysis back in the day on compared the source data version that we were provided as part of an archive to what's actually on the disk. And if it's truly just, this is better, higher resolution, we would use that as a starting point to have the best possible data. We try to always work backwards from the disk. There's a lot of data mining involved, right? Because also if you look at it from a code perspective, code could be written to support any kind of different scenario. And if we had to support every one of those scenarios, we might potentially be doing a lot of work that's not necessary. So we do a lot of data mining to figure out, okay, from this feature set the engine provides, what is actually used on the data in the disk, right? Because it's not uncommon to have game code where you have like 5-6 movie players embedded in the code, but only 3 of them are used. So you can save yourself some time porting some code. Usually the way you start is you get a code base and it doesn't compile on the latest compiler. So you're forced to go through and it's like, okay, let's make this compile in the first place. So a lot of it turns into like, here's a function to make that compile and actually be able to run. There's a decent chunk of work involved. So you insert kind of like a breakpoint at the top. If that code ever gets hit, it basically like fails and crashes. And so you kind of stub out a bunch of stuff as you go through. And then eventually when you get to the point where the game finally compiles and you can hit run, then it's like, okay, what's the first thing that crashes, right? And then start fixing things along the way. That's another method where you kind of go through and like make sure you don't do redundant work as much as possible. Obviously the original code base is Japanese, so is the original development team. So when you're saying like, here's a dump of design documents, none of us can read them. So there's actually a
io pensavo che dentro avessero qualcuno che sa giapponese perché hanno lavorato talmente tanto con gli studi giapponesi.
This is an interesting design document. There might be something useful in here for us, right? Sony went through and actually had this all translated, so we'd get these gigantic translated documents back to then try to make some use of it. It was kind of sad, right? Because you look at them and you're like, this might be interesting, and then some poor guy has to go through and translate the whole thing, and then in the end it may turn out it's like, oh, this was an outdated document, right? It's like, you just never know.
Once we get that initial code base and we start getting everything to compile and run, like the very first step that we do is we get the original art assets, converted maybe to R formats, all of the original data, we get the game up and running, and then we do parity tests with the game compared to the PS3. So we'll have our QA department playing our version of the game on our target console, and then we'll have QA also playing on the PS3 and recording videos and doing side-by-side playthroughs and verifying that everything's the same. And that's where we go through and we find out that, oh yeah, that assumption that we made about the data when we converted the data to our formats, and we're like, I don't think this is really used, or we think it's being used in this way. And then you get over to the game and you're like, you know what? Nobody can climb ladders. Somebody needs to go find the ladder code. Where's the ladder code, right? Or, bosses won't die correctly, or they don't disappear, or fog doors don't open. Who knows, right? There's always something. We go through and we play, and we spend a good couple of months just making sure that we have parity with the original game. Then start looking at what systems does the original game have? What systems do we want to pull over into the Bluepoint side and completely replace? It's really just looking at it from a quality perspective and saying, what pieces really need to be done? Like in Demon Souls, we knew that animation, like increasing the fidelity of the animation, adding new animations, adding omni rolling, increasing the bow aiming, like animation was going to be huge. So we knew that whatever we did with our animation system, we needed that to be on the Bluepoint side. That was a no-brainer. Other things like, what is the boss AI look like? That's very ingrained into the Demon Souls side of the code base. So for that perspective, it's like, well, let's leave it over there. But even every system that we leave over there, we're tweaking, and fixing, and modifying, and enhancing, and going over there to make the appropriate changes.
Almeno a volte giochi li provavo ma qui è molto più di questo.
What system needs to be improved? How do we improve it? And then at the same time, our QA staff is so diligent about playing through the PS3 and our version the entire time and saying, this isn't working right. You broke this, and I don't think that's intentional.
The guys are working so hard around the world to get the game done, and there are bugs, and you're trying to get everything fixed, and people want to do the best they can and put out the best product they can, but in the back of your head there's a drop dead deadline, and we're all up against it, and when that date comes we all have to down tools basically and say we've done what we can. And it makes you second guess yourself all the time, which is the worst thing you can do, right? Because you're trying to please everyone, and what you need to do is please the game, right? For instance, how do we incorporate the haptics into the game, right? And if you're making a new game, that's easy because you can write features, right? And put that in the game. But this, we had to try and implement it in a way that it would complement the game and it wouldn't detract from the game. Evaluating every step to make sure you weren't harming what is a PlayStation classic and making sure that you're complementing the classic instead.
Talking about this game provides us with a terrific opportunity to show design changes across the board, from art to audio, animation to user experience. To make all of this happen, Bluepoint worked with a global team of Sony's partner studios over the course of a number of years. But all stories have their first chapter, and just like the game, the work on Demon's Souls Remake started with the first area that the game serves you up. A level designed to teach you how the game works, gives players their first challenge, and provides an epic first impression of the world of Demon's Souls.
Se te lo chiedo adesso questo video perché lo stiamo guardando, no, ce l'avevo in coda da un po'. Era un po' che volevo vedere questo documentario e niente, oggi ho deciso di guardarlo.
So it's also naturally, it's the first area that we really focused on. It's the area of the game that we really use to sort of set the visual quality. All 5 regions have very different looks and they have very different atmospheres and so on. But Boletarian Palace was really where we pushed to say, what is the quality bar for a PS5 title? What does a next generation title really look like?
Ecco, questo è veramente fighissimo.
Looking at from all of our various systems to, what is fog and lighting and tessellation and everything else in our post effects and everything look like in these levels to, it's got tight corridors. So it's like, how does the camera behave in these areas? How does the character and how is the interaction with the dredgelings in that sort of combat? If there's one character that's been killed more than anybody else in the entire game during the dev cycle, it's the dredgelings that are on that first bridge
Purtroppo
section.
Demon's Souls su PC non credo ci siano news, se non sbaglio.
Even going to, we had conversations about the intro dragon and how the dragon comes in and swoops down. We made modifications from the original, slight modifications to make it work a little bit better for us. I really wanted that thing to be a standout piece, to adding, footprints in the ground where the dragon left his imprints that weren't there in the original, but they're little puddles and you can see them. They're sort of this reminder every time you go up the staircase that, oh yes, this is where I first encountered my first dragon. That's really an area that I think we spent more time in than anywhere else.
It definitely had a lot of unique challenges, like the Fire of the Dragons, that went through several iterations until it ended in its final version. It was also the most complex of the level when it came to a number of AIs and just sheer number of stuff. So it was also like, it was the saying in the studio was always, if this level runs at performance, everything else will be a piece of cake. Sightlines was definitely a thing. It was a sheer production effort too, because you can pretty much see across all 3 sections of the whole world from the very beginning. And if you're in the very end, you can look back and pretty much see the whole level again. So until you build the final version of that next level, you can't really build like the low poly imposter version of it. So it was also one of the last levels to essentially complete fully because it needed all the sections from the very beginning all the way to the very end. And the art style actually changes. In the very beginning, it's all primitive looking art, the stones are like more crumbly, more destroyed, there's more battles on the outer walls of the whole palace complex. And then as it goes it goes into like more fancy areas, the architecture changes.
Un documentario sul
so there's a lot
Nemesis, sai che non lo so.
Manpower involved in creating all those
Ecco,
assets.
sì,
And again,
Gamers
it wasn't until
con la V
everything was built at high poly
uno
that
di
we
quei
could then
canali
really
che
focus on, okay, now
già
let's build the
conoscevo, mi
efficient
sono
versions
segnato e sono un po' di
to
cose
actually get
molto
the
interessanti.
final sanity check. Is this all gonna run at performance?
Tra cui
And
Fable, sì.
I think what's really interesting about that well, Boletaria in general is the art change from the original to the PlayStation 5 version, and taking it from a kind of Roman neoclassic squared off look British kind of castle to a much more, not Gothic, but leaning towards a Gothic style. And that was something that I definitely endorsed and something that I loved, that Mark Skelton, the art director, wanted to push, and I think it worked out really well. And the reason that I was okay with that is that I think gaming trends change. Games change and what we like changes, and that's true to art styles too, and art looks as well. And moving it in that direction meant that it gave, the artists a lot more freedom to create this much more realistic world, on the PlayStation 5, where you felt that, as Marco said, there was a change from the outer walls of the castle as you move through all the way up to, the King's Palace, how more decorative it got, how they started to change.
Hanno ricostruito più o meno sullo scheletro dell'originale, sì.
Much more ornately carved pieces and metal ornate stuff that would have been extremely expensive, put into the design. So I think Boletaria is a really standout piece of well thought out storytelling. As a director, it's like, oh yeah, I can see myself moving through this world, it's telling a story. And that was one of the things that we always talked about, was everything in these levels had to tell a story. Every room had to tell a story. It had to have a meaning. What did they do there before the fog came, and what happened when the fog came? And I think Boletaria tells that story really well.
Remaking a beloved game is a pretty delicate and complex operation, so for the sake of simplicity, let's break this down into 3 sections: technical changes, gameplay changes, and artistic changes.
Obviously, there are a lot of things that need to be done technically to have Demon's Souls feel like a game made in 2020. From cutscenes to animation, sound design, graphics, and a million other things we don't even think of. From a gameplay perspective, Bluepoint have over a decade of players playing the game to learn from. So were there aspects of the original games that didn't quite click, or are there ways to surface some of the game's more obscure mechanisms? And lastly, how about artistic innovations? Games looked a lot different in 2009, so Bluepoint were tasked with interpreting much of the work done by From Software, from changing the way areas look to adding new details, such as the ghostly wisps that show the human form of Boletaria's fallen demons.
So let's explore some of those changes, where Bluepoint felt they got it right and where the community think they got it wrong.
È vero, ci sono alcune cose che la community non ha gradito.
Is heavily Japanese game style and
provato a giocare al PS5 e purtroppo in nessun modo mi prende, pure tecnicamente graficamente mi piace un botto, stessa identica cosa.
Even though the world is Western,
è veramente bellissimo.
And the story is told is very, very Japanese and very, very subtly told. That was another reason, not only their ability and their technical prowess, but also that we knew we could trust them with something so delicate. So adding something like those figures above the bosses, we were fine with that because the lore states that each one of those bosses was a hero of King Alant, who had, and that's what they'd become. And so as you freed them, you saw their real form for a split second before they were dispersed, so to speak. So that sort of subtlety, I think, adds to the lore and it adds to the story because the story was already there. We're just doing it visually. We're not writing anything new into the world at all. We're just visually showing, oh yeah, okay, that's a reminder that that creature was once a knight of the king, for instance.
So yeah, at the beginning of the project, we look just like we are ourselves of the game, right? We have our perspective for like, oh, here's the things that annoyed us, and like 4-way rolling was one of those things for sure, right? We do, like at the beginning of the game, we get started on a project, we scope everything. We scour all the content that's available on the internet. We watch playthrough videos from people. We read every single Demon's Souls wiki there's out there from beginning to end, right? We look through forums, discussions, Reddits, etc., right? We gather everything there is, all the complaints, we discuss it, and then we have our design talent look at it also from their perspective, from their experience of like, okay, what are valid concerns? What are people, just challenges in the game, that you have to deal with? But there's a lot of subtle stuff, we kind of tweak we very slightly changed some of the pickup drop rates right before failings, for example, to make it easier, because we realized from looking at trophy stats that a lot of people stopped playing the game before ever beating failings. And to us, it kind of felt where it's like, once people actually defeat their first true boss, the game really starts to click, and you kind of start to get what it's like to actually do something, have a challenge and overcome it, right? And so we kind of made some subtle tweaks, even in the beginning, before failings, increase the drop rates of some fire pickups to give more people a chance. Like looking at trophy stats now, it kind of shows a lot more people are making it fast failings.
Bam! Sì. Phalanx l'ho sconfitto anch'io.
I think that's probably the kind of insight that people didn't have back in the day, looking at what are trophy unlock stats, and obviously we have the benefit of hindsight, right? We get to look at how did players play the game in the past, what can we improve? There's always a difference of how do players perceive the game, and how did the developer intend the game to be perceived, right? You can't just always go to the developer of a game and say, how did you mean to do this originally? What was your intent? Because at some point, especially when you have technical limitations in the way, it's not really at all what the developer meant to do. It's all about, oh, what did I think it means, right? And Demon's Souls very specifically is a very ambiguous game. It leaves a lot for you to figure out, wild world tendencies, character tendencies, just to name a couple. Like, those are techniques that are not explained, and it's kind of like, it's a challenge for people to figure
questa
out.
cosa è stata dei trofei, giocatori completamente diversi giochi, dati interessanti. Sì, è vero. Infatti è proprio quello che hanno fatto con questo gioco.
Putting extra UI in to teach you about world tendencies and how it affects things.
Forse un po' le meccaniche di gioco, se vedere Master Mode PS3 che rimanere fedeli all'originale. Il fatto è che quelle dinamiche di gioco sono proprio costitutive del gioco, e quindi è amato per questo. Se cambi quello, cambi praticamente tutto.
As I played through Demon's Souls my very first time, I did much more of a melee type build. 3/4 of the way through the game, I started to figure out what magic was, and I got my first caster, and but I didn't know how to use my magic. I couldn't figure out how to use magic, and so I had to go to the wiki, and as great as that is, and in that game when I played it on the PS3, yeah, I referenced the wiki a lot, but we start looking at it, and it's like, these days, like, how much do we actually want the user to go to the wiki? And it's like, well, really never. We really don't want them to go to the wiki. Take, for example, vaulting. That we knew that it's like, this is a mechanic that's in the game that unless you accidentally stumble across it, you will never know about it. We changed the game up slightly. So in the tutorial section, right as you're jumping off the bridge for the very first time, less than 5 minutes into the game, you run across one of your first messages on the ground, you bring that up, that allows you to then hit this little button that goes to show you a help video page to start introducing you to it, where you see a guy pressing the right button combinations to vault over the wall. If we could teach or expose these things to the player in a way that feels very natural within the game, we could hopefully reduce frustration or basically eliminate the issues of where players can get through the whole game and then they get to the end, they're like, I didn't even know you could do that.
PlayStation, yes.
I never figured out how to cast magic, so I just avoided that. And it's like, no, that shouldn't be a thing. As we went through it, we decided, well, we could add a help page, to the end inside of our menu system. But the great thing about it is I feel like it complements the game. It doesn't change lore, it doesn't change difficulty, it doesn't change the aspects of the game. It's just exposing information that's available everywhere else. And we did the same sort of thing with the PlayStation systems, with their UDS systems and activities, and being able to go to certain sections and then see help videos. Like if you're having a hard time, right, you can go to the UDS activity system. Now at the same time, we never spell it out directly, but if you watch the way that the combat is approached, you can then apply that to yourself. And so they're little things that we found when we played it initially of, I wish that would have been a little more clear. I wish I wouldn't have been frustrated with that. I wish it would have been a little bit simpler for me. And I feel like those are just like little keys or little touches that we could put on the game to make it clearer.
In parte questa cosa, se mi ricordo bene i discorsi, non è piaciuta più di tanto.
Yeah, I was present for every mocap shoot with Bluepoint's animation director Chris Torres, and it was, I've done a lot of mocap in my time, all the way going back to late 90s when I was working on The Getaway in London. So I've done mocap ever since then. And I love it. I started as an animator. I love directing mocap actors, but this was actually one of the hardest things we'd ever done in the game, because what we had to do is match the cadence of the original animation. So I mean, the walk speeds and the run cycles and the attacks and everything had to be exactly the same. They didn't have to look the same, but they had to feel the same.
Esatto.
And that's where it comes back,
quello il
where we
punto.
spent day after day after day beating up poor Eric Jacobus, the motion capture actor, to get him to basically get into the right set. And he didn't have to do just one walk cycle. He had to do over 30 different walk cycles, because we had 30 different types of weapons that had to be done, right? Or that, and that's runs and turns and everything that you can imagine. I think it took us the whole day just to do one move set. And then by the end of it, we were getting that down to about 70, 80 minutes. We could do a move set properly. And we could look at it and we would know, off the top of our hat. We decided very early on that we wanted to not only do the male capture, we wanted to make sure that the female characters had motion capture as well. So we did a whole female character motion capture set as well with Maggie McDonald, who was also amazing. I think it took about a year and a half. I mean, we weren't in the studio for a year and a half, but we were obviously going backwards and forwards for about a year and a half and capturing and getting it into the game and testing and checking.
We've had countless new
ciao,
idle
grazie mille del
animations
follow.
for enemies as well, which
Benvenuto.
are all new mocap animations. So, like, mocap was not just limited to the player. You have like a character idle cycle, it's like 20, 30 seconds. It's just like it all needs sound, etc., etc. But this adds to the life, right? Because now you have all these characters instead of just them standing in a fixed idle pose, just waiting for the player to get close. It would actually give them a chance to like tell a story again in the world, right?
In the studio, we actually got 5 actors in at the same time, and so they would do all those idle animations at the same time. We would say, you're really bored. And so you get 5 animations in one take of 5 different actors.
Cos'è lo scitto di spade? Musica minacciosa.
You know, as we went through the game, we picked several pillars that we wanted to be really stand out. In Flame Lurker, like that, the intro, the fight, that whole experience, we knew we wanted that one to be top notch. And it's a difficult thing, because at the same time, like, you take the Flame Lurker and you take the model and you look at the original PS3 model, and there's details there, but there's a lot of not details there. And so when you look at it on the PS3, I feel like your eye naturally makes up, you look at something, you see some shading, you see some light, you see some things, and then your eye sort of fills in the details and so on. But when you actually get up to the model, it's just not there. It's like you want to see something better than what it really is. And so when we start working on those models, it's like, well, what are they trying to do here? I don't know. Maybe you can look at some of their past concepts that they did. But then to earlier points, like, that doesn't even mean that concept was in line with what they actually ended up delivering in the end. We went through and we looked at the model, we looked at what it needed to do in the level, how it needed to behave, and came up, with what we felt like, here's a great interpretation. It might not be, triangle for triangle accurate to what the original was, because that's not what we're trying to do. And at the end, you just kind of gotta let go and say, I think this is the best thing for the game. And in the end, it got released in some of our early trailers, and part of it was we knew we wanted this to be this really cool experience, and it shows really, really well, and so it makes it into trailers. And then, as you've most likely seen, like, the fan base reacted of, where's the patch on his eye? You forgot the patch on his eye. Half our staff starts going through and saying, where's the patch? We got to get the patch. Everybody needs the patch back on the eye. And we're looking at it, it was like, whoa, we need to think about this for a minute. Why did we do this? And sometimes you got to stand by what you're doing in order to create something that's great. If you're always wish-washing, going every what direction, you're never going to make anything that anybody cares about.
Non
We
potrei
went
essere
back,
più
we looked
d'accordo.
at it more closely, and we decided, yes, the best thing to do is put the patch back on the eye. So we put the patch back on the eye and brought it more in line with what the original was, which in the end I think was a great decision to put the patch back on the eye. It helped tell us the story a little bit better. You know, it also ties in closer with the blacksmith, you know, that's also in Stonefang. And so in the end, that was the right decision. But at that point was the kicking off moment of, let's go look at every single character in the game, which was a multi-day task of key people sitting down, looking at every single character down to their feet to make sure, you know, that everything, we're not missing anything lore-wise. We didn't accidentally overlook an aspect that maybe is more important than we thought, or we didn't overemphasize something that was in the original, but now we made it too transparent and it's not, you know, you don't have to infer it enough.
Trailer, questa cosa aveva un volto diverso, poi hanno cambiato il gioco finale perché non ci fossero lamentele.
Flamelurker
Questa non
is
me la
just one
ricordo.
of dozens of enemies that the team at Bluepoint were responsible for redesigning. And while the art is a critical element of this, there is so much more work going on to make this game feel modern. Things like physics, modern visual effects, redesigning and implementing 3D audio, even how the camera feels. So how did Bluepoint tackle these changes? The elements that made the game feel new, even if we didn't even realize they were changed. How about we start with the first boss you encounter?
Right, so the art style itself is obviously a bit more realistic, trying to be more realistic. So when you have a Vanguard who's kind of designed to be a little funny, comical, right? He's got like these tiny, tiny wings, and then one of his attacks is he like floats up in mid-air and looks like a butt stomp, right? So it's like, you know, like a lot of this stuff is kind of tongue-in-cheek. So, but at the same time, if you do it as is, in a realistic-looking environment, it's going to feel a little out of place. So you have to make some slight changes, right? And it's like, yes, Vanguard, obviously you're never going to be able to sell somebody that big, that chubby looking, lifting off with tiny wings. So really you can't even sell with the wings being slightly bigger like we made them. But at least, you know, we're trying to like, let's have it make a bit more sense, make them bigger, right? And yeah, we did the same thing on the dragons actually, which originally their wings were much smaller and we made them much larger to help sell visually. So you don't have that subconscious thing in the back of your head where it's like, something feels off here, you know? It just makes it feel more realistic.
I think the bosses, a lot of them, like especially the Vanguard, you know, really benefited from, you know, the extra things that we can do with physics these days. You know, from the chains to, you know, I don't know what the thing on the side is, his extra nipple.
Guardate quanto
whatever,
bello
that,
è,
sort of
santi Dio, è veramente
you know,
incredibile.
It adds a bit of realism, or it makes him feel like he's connected to the environment.
We went through Man-Eater as well, and Maiden in Black, and the Blacksmiths. And I remember, like, I got an image board one morning. I went into the office in Tokyo, and there's some image, you know, Gavin, please check out these image boards. And the Blacksmiths were like really bulked up, and I'm like, no, that's not gonna happen. They look great. I mean, they looked amazing. It was beautiful artwork, but that's not gonna happen. And I hope we did a good job, and most people are happy out
Il gioco
there
è Demon
and
Souls, il
the way
remake.
that we did it, and because we don't want to disrespect the game in any way or disrespect fans in any way, because we're big fans of the games ourselves. I think one of the best decisions ever was the Armored Spider, where the explosive gas attack got turned into the oil attack, and it just rushed up the corridor at you and it pushed you all the way back. Now, visually it's stunning, but gameplay wise it's a great twist, because then now you have to fight all your way back down that corridor again, you know, before you can actually do any damage to that thing. That's a great twist for me. The other things that I really enjoy in the game are all the things that were added. The players are supposed to find themselves, you know.
Sì, è vero, anche Shadow of the Colossus remake era veramente bellissimo da vedere.
Hits the tree, and you know, as you run through the doorway.
Ma questo,
and stuff,
porca miseria, è proprio un altro passo secondo me.
Are things that we talked about specifically about.
Secondo me, artisticamente e tecnicamente è uno dei giochi più belli usciti negli ultimi anni.
You know, actually played. It's how they remembered the game. And you're always
proprio le
trying to build the
soluzioni
game
che
to
hanno
their
trovato per questo è
and their
veramente
memories of the
fighissimo.
game are far better than the game ever was.
Marshall,
because
ciao.
It all becomes this amazing world inside your head. It's like reading a book, basically. Over time, it becomes this realistic thing. So those changes really help to pay homage to those memories that people have, even though they never existed in the original.
I think one of the things that I'm most proud about is just the little touches.
Sì, è vero,
c'è
uno stacco generazionale con questo, assolutamente sì, vero.
And then being able to burn them, to being able to take a dead body and push it into the fire, and then that body then catches on fire, and then if it gets pushed out of the fire, it's blackened by the fire, and it's just those little touches that they're like these little feedback loops that basically keep you ingrained in the world. Simple things like adding head tracking on the players and on the enemy AI.
Sembra uno shot, infatti
lo è. Player, if he's standing there idle and there's an enemy walking next to him, he'll look over at the enemy, where in a lot of games or even in the original, you would just stare straight forward in the direction that you're going, but it's like there's this guy over here that's gonna attack you or is coming up on you. Maybe you should look over there and pay attention. But it's just a lot of those little tiny touches and attention to detail that I think really make a difference. One of the things I thought we did a really good job with was our footstep detection. You'd be able to detect that you stepped in a puddle in one spot and then it leaves a wet footprint. These little things that basically connect you as a gamer to the player that you're playing, that then connects you to the world that you're in.
Ma le luci, guarda la catena,
really, at the end of the day,
è impressionante.
We essentially re-implemented every single bit of audio in the game. All the sound effects were completely redone by Sony, right? They recorded new Foley, did new sound effects, new treatments. There's some amazing tech that went into the game where we had set up individual areas in the game with connecting portals, and each of those areas in the game, whether you're in a tunnel or a big giant open outdoor space or a cavern or a palace room, they each had their own individual impulse reverbs associated with it. And so then it ran past simulation of what is the path the audio travels from its original source, through which rooms, through which doors, to your ear, and then it applied the right amounts of reverbs to each, and it did the right amount of focusing.
Pensiamo alla versione PS3 è rimasta enorme, comunque dell'originale, questo si è fatto di pianta.
PlayStation, right, of like just what you can do.
È una via di mezzo, come
hundreds of streams going on. Because you can
come
also
stanno
support those streams using the
tanta roba in più.
So it doesn't really become anymore like all the audio has to be loaded in memory at one time. You can't just stream it all directly off the disk. And I mean, you get gigabytes of throughput from that disk, right?
Yeah, I think there's two things going on there with the sound in this game which are incredible, right? The original creators made an amazing decision, which was that there's no music.
Hanno urlando con quella grafica epico.
And the reason
Secondo me prima o poi arriveranno i
remake
anche di quelli.
A world of despair and loss. And music is your friend. It drives your emotions, right? So it can bolster you and make you feel more heroic. And you're not supposed to be a hero here. So as you run through the game, the only sound that you have is of this, horrific world around you. And then when you walk into those boss battles, suddenly the music comes in. It becomes like a friend on your shoulder to bolster you, because those boss battles are difficult. They're hard. And the other one is I sat down and went through every single part of that game with the sound director and said, right, this is how I want the player to feel at this point. If I walk up to this door, right, in the tutorial, if you walk up to the door on the bridge that you jump off, you can hear Vanguard growling off in the distance, right? Things like that. Or as I run up the stairs in the tutorial, I just want to hear a stone fall off the wall and I can hear it splash way down below.
Pensare From essendo esclusivo e From da questo livello tecnico neanche ci si avvicina. Già, purtroppo
because it's all 3D audio now. It's incredibly immersive.
Parecchi rimedi un paio a voglia continueranno ad arrivare perché funzionano e le persone li comprano, quindi.
And it was an amazing effort by the sound guys to create the huge lists that we were writing, and it really adds to the world. The visual look is incredible on the PlayStation 5, but the sound also is absolutely amazing.
Beh, sì, sono d'accordo, anche il suono è impressionante. Abbia buonasera.
And actually, to Gavin's point, they've had very much responsibility for the feel of the game, because the audio guys are also the guys that designed the waveforms, that control the vibrations, that control.
Sì, appunto, Capcom mica ha finito con i remake.
Were created by the audio team in conjunction with the actual sound effects, so the vibrations would match perfectly to the sound effect and were tweaked directly for that purpose. So yeah, they're very much in control too of like, what does it feel like when I do a magic attack? The charging up, the vibration that intensifies as you charge up that casting that magic, right? That was all designed by the audio guys in conjunction with the actual sound effects.
I would say, obviously we started the game with the original Demon's Souls camera. And one of the things that, looking at the original camera, issues that we had was, framing, which really that's all the camera does, right? Is it frames the picture. And so it's, can you see what you need to see? Do you see what you want to see? Or do you find that you're constantly trying to move the stick to adjust it because it's not quite getting what you want? And so, we made a conscious decision to bring the camera slightly lower than the original. And a lot of that was because as you're running, like just take that front bridge of Boletaria, right? As you're running up that first staircase and such, you want to be able to see the dredgelings that you're running up upon and being able to see what's coming at you and what's going on and to take the battle scene in. And so we felt like lowering the camera a little bit was a good call. And I feel like in the end, it allows you to see what's going on, and it plays better on
La
the
famosa
PS5
telecamera dei Souls.
And so from that, like we spent a lot of time actually working on the camera system to enhancing it to, in boss battles, looking at our lock-on points, what are we framing, how are we framing it, and then what are our transitions? Like, do we have smooth transitions from, say our lock-on camera to our free roam camera to, as you're running around the level, is it correctly moving around corners and around, all the wood posts that are within the level? There was a lot of attention put into the camera just to clean it up. And cameras are tricky. They're always very tricky.
Anche
And part of it is what we always say,
figa,
on the engineering side is if nobody talks about your camera, you did a good job. If people talk about your camera, they've always got something negative to say. In the end, we feel like if nobody talks about it, then we're doing okay. Latria is a great example, and I think, just that early stages in the gel cells, like there's always this thing of, I believe in the original design, you're supposed to wander around. It's not supposed to be clear exactly where to go, but there are, lighting keys or other things that are done within the environment, to sort of give very subtle type hints, or to the keys on the walls that give off a little bit of a glint to give you an idea of where to go. I think one of the changes that we made in that area as well is, we notice as the player runs up and down the walkways next to the gel cells, some of the architecture would sort of protrude out.
L'atmosfera l'ho vista
and would
comunque
cause you as a player, you'd be running through and your player capsule would slide to the side to run through it. And so every time you'd run up and down it, you'd be like, it's a little bit jarring, doesn't feel quite right. And so we pulled a little bit of that architecture back just a little bit, but also being very mindful of, sometimes those are used for the mind flares in order to ensure that you have cover from, their projectile attacks and such. And so it's this delicate balance of opening up the space a little bit so that the player can navigate and so the camera doesn't have as many problems moving through the environment. And in the end, with the whole goal of, can we make it feel a little more fluid without, changing the original?
E insomma.
Bluepoint worked with a global team of Sony partners to create this modern version of Demon's Souls, studios around the world that specialized in motion capture, audio recording, texture creation, music composition, and more. But while much of the work was outsourced, the team at Bluepoint in Austin did all of the project conception, style decisions, level design, lighting, and more. A large reason their modest team was able to achieve all this was by using technology and tools to help do the work for them. Mechanisms of design that weren't available to From Software when they made the original back in 2009, and technical limitations of the console hardware of the time that may have forced them to make certain design decisions.
Altogether, local at the studio, we were at the peak, I don't want to lie, I want to say we're somewhere between 70 and 90 people in that range. It was just going up and down. Yeah, the staff works smart. I can give some specific examples here. We use a lot of Houdini stuff to accelerate building. So we have amazing tech artists that build Houdini tools that can automatically break up walls. Like when we build a brick pattern, we build it in smart enough to support so the Houdini tools know what the brick layout looks like. And so it can automatically break at the brick boundaries, cut those out, and then create realistic in-between filler between the bricks, in the wall. And it's a very dynamic tool. It's allowing the artist to just like, okay, here's an unbroken wall. Let me create some curves, right? It breaks it, and then it simulates the collapsing bricks and then falling down into tiles. And then we bake that all down into Geo. Valley of Defilement is another great example where in the original, you couldn't see very far at all. Once you came into the big open cave section, it was very heavily fogged, technical limitations, performance issues. It still didn't run that fast, right, on the original PS3. So you could tell that the content was really trying to push what was possible at the time. And now, performance isn't an issue anymore. We could draw everything, and you could see everything from your starting point, but obviously that goes against the game design. You're supposed to feel lost in the swamp and make your way to where you're supposed to go and get led on, right? Now that visibility, how much do you show, get the right hints, so it never feels like we're cutting corners, like let's drop that stuff in the distance, right? But again, it's also a huge area. So there's a perfect example where we worked really smart. Our tech artist actually wrote
Sì, ha voglia, certo che sono graditi. Per questo lo dico.
Boards, planks,
alla fine
right?
alle persone piace rivivere queste cose in chiave moderna.
And so we wrote Houdini tools that actually took that geo, analyzed it to figure out how the patterns and the flow of the planks were, and it placed real 3D objects, high-res planks that we created automatically as a starting point. So basically tech art did a first pass on the whole level, and then just art then came in after the fact and just kept addressing it and updating it, set dressing it. That's kind of an explanation, I think, why we're able to do so much with so little. It's just because we don't work hard, we work smart. And that brings lots of other benefits, right? Like the whole team can sit together and watch a playthrough of the game and talk about it. You don't have like 300-400 people studios where half the team is like doing off something else on a different time zone and doesn't know what's going on in the game,
I just think the overall whole storytelling, through the environment, through the sound is absolutely incredible. Creating that first level that you enter and you can see how everything's being washed down, in a massive flood down into the valley, and you've got trees and netting and then, the enemies take that and build them into their houses, and there's barnacles growing over everything. It's wet and you can see the water and the insects, and it's like, yeah, this is a valley.
Grazie mille della sub con Prime. Grazie.
It's a great thing. I think one of the things that we haven't touched on, which is really quite cool, is I think the character creator.
On the human side, we started with facial scans. So both females and males we scanned. Then we broke faces down into individual parts. We had a full fax shape set that we scanned in and got the motion capture for. We built a system on top that then retargeted all that blend shape data for all the different fax shape. So we could actually have one set of these fax shapes we recorded and reapply them to all the enemies, including draglings, soldiers, right? So even some that aren't quite as human, like a dragling, their facial animation is actually driven by the exact same system that the player's facial animation system is driven by. And so phoneme-based, drives the fax shapes, animators going in, keying it all out, creating little additive animation clips we can play for like sound cues, for like getting hit, attacks, dying sounds. Writing good tech once and then just reusing it wherever you can. Or like, oh, let's do this for the players. Well, if the players can have amazing blend shapes, the hardware is powerful enough, we can have every single enemy have blend shapes. Just like we can have every single enemy have cloth simulation on their garments, right? Or they're just the hanging drapes or anything that they have, or other physics animation for like chains hanging or ropes hanging or you name it, right? Or like little armor pieces that move around, right? That can all just be real physics these days. And it just creates that secondary motion that you wouldn't be able to easily get out of animation, because when an animation blends through that animation, you get that follow-through motion from those dynamic things.
Un gioco 2020, 4 anni, tecnicamente ancora incredibili, è però anche un'opera molto curata questa.
So in the cutscenes, that's me smirking, which to the animator's great credit, they managed to hide all my imperfections. So you can't recognize me, it's perfect.
Bluepoint Games' remake of Demon's Souls is a fascinating piece of work, as much an artistic achievement as a technical one. Perhaps it's even more impressive that this was a console launch title, finished during a pandemic, a point at which they were already mourning the tragic passing of their friend and Bluepoint co-founder, Andy O'Neill, an Englishman who moved to Austin in the 1990s to work on some terrific titles as technical lead at Retro Studios, a remarkably talented engineer who was instrumental in propelling this once two-person operation to the lofty heights they find themselves at today.
In Demon's Souls, Bluepoint Games have achieved something pretty remarkable, recreating a beloved PlayStation classic in a way that fans of that game and that series can really appreciate, and opening the door for new players to have their first taste of From Software's Soulsborne action. Making video games is really difficult, but just like that feeling of finally defeating Maneater, for Bluepoint at least, the struggle was worth it in the end.
I have one thing to say. Thank you to all the fans. You guys keep us going. Just to add to like Gavin's earlier response, according to like the challenge of making a launch game, right? I think a challenge, I think of it in a positive way for sure, right? Being able to be a launch title on the PS5, you know, being the team that delivers a genre-defining title on the new console and having that power, right? Being able to like, oh, you have a game that instantly loads, it shows off all the features of the hardware, right?
I think as a studio, being a launch title, like the minute that became an option, from Bluepoint's perspective, it was, yes, we want to be the launch title. We want to be right there that opening day, because, you know, it was one of those highly anticipated titles. And it was difficult. There was struggles, especially with COVID, but I wouldn't change it.
Eh sì, i documentari di Noclip sono proprio belli. E questi sono i ringraziamenti ai Patreon. Giustamente c'è la parte finale dei credits, che ovviamente noi la vediamo perché è giustamente quelli che hanno reso possibile esattamente quello che vedete. Ragazzi, io ovviamente con questo gioco ho un rapporto estremamente parziale, perché è uno di quei titoli che, come tutti i Souls di varia natura, alla fine ho provato e non apprezzato a livello di gameplay, ma questa è una cosa, diciamo, personale. Ma questo gioco è incredibile dal punto di vista tecnico e artistico, ed è un raggiungimento molto importante, ed è veramente peculiare che questa cosa sia stata fatta con un remake, no? E Bluepoint ha questa caratteristica di creare queste opere che sono un remake di qualcosa di originale, ma curate veramente e portate all'eccellenza assoluta. E onestamente, se siete amanti del genere, è un titolo che dovreste assolutamente giocare se non l'avete ancora fatto. E onestamente io spero che continuino. Si vocifera che dovrebbero fare un IP tutta loro, ma è un po' che non sentiamo delle voci da Bluepoint, quindi vuol dire che sono alacremente al lavoro su qualcosa. Quindi insomma, è un qualcosa che vale la pena. E così effettivamente è stato uno dei titoli di lancio di PlayStation 5. Questa è una cosa che avevo abbastanza rimosso anche io. E invece no, lo è. Anni che gira questa voce è stata come cosa, vero che è sana, però ci starebbe anche, perché Bluepoint adesso ultimamente negli ultimi anni è venuta fuori come realtà particolarmente abile nel fare dei remake, e questa cosa se la sono pienamente guadagnata, nel senso, guardate che cosa hanno fatto. Anche Shadow of the Colossus, ne abbiamo parlato prima, è stato citato anche dal documentario, no? Ecco, anche quella è un'opera veramente importantissima. Questa, io spero che continuino a fare questo tipo di opere, remake o no, nel senso è veramente una cosa che va all'essenza del videogioco. Come avete visto in tutto quanto il documentario, il modo in cui hanno trattato questa opera è come dovrebbe essere trattata qualsiasi opera, o perlomeno insomma le opere che hanno un valore, hanno acquisito un certo credito da parte dei giocatori. Sì, remake o titoli di questo livello, spero tanto che ne vedremo degli altri, ragazzi, lo spero davvero tanto. Detto questo, anche se vedete, questa è una cosa importante, no? Io, come sapete, Demon's Souls l'ho giocato 2 ore, no? C'è ancora la mia live da qualche parte archiviata su YouTube, e come vedete io ero così, il gameplay non mi portava alcun tipo di soddisfazione, ma anche lì per lì non ho mancato di notare quanto bene è fatto questo gioco, quindi è un titolo che consiglio lo stesso nonostante i miei gusti, e questa è una cosa estremamente importante, che si continui a fare così, secondo me. Ok, 6? La recensione di YouTube già non è abbastanza. Vabbè, ci sarebbero altre cose da dire, però sto quello che ho detto nella recensione. Allora, Bloodborne, io credo che, anche stando ai rumor, penso proprio che sia uno di quei titoli di cui faranno un remake di questo tipo. Sì, esattamente. Si dice PS6 o cose del genere? Sì, è vero. Sì, è vero. Si dice PS6. E credo che avverrà più o meno in quel modo lì. Bene, sì, con tanto di applauso. Allora, come sempre, bellissimo documentario da Noclip, ma ormai diciamo ci abbiamo quasi fatto il callo in senso positivo del termine. Noclip fa dei bellissimi documentari che diciamo che vi consiglio assolutamente di seguire, come ho fatto all'inizio. Ragazzi, non c'è molto altro da dire. Durante i titoli di coda abbiamo detto tutto. Sono contento di aver visto questo documentario insieme a voi e spero tanto che avremo modo di vederne altri. Insomma, spero tanto che abbiate gradito. Ah sì, quella parte del video con il combattimento era un po' alta di volume. Sì, è vero. Va bene, ragazzi, allora io volevo dirvi una cosa. Al termine di questa live volevo continuare e finire Brothers Remake, ma mi dovete perdonare, sono un tantinello stanchino dopo questi giorni in cui ho tritato di brutto, quindi vorrei continuare a registrare un pochino Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, e poi devo fare le news, ok, che domani ci sono, quindi per ora vorrei saltare per questa volta, facciamo un'eccezione e lo finiamo. No, domani non c'è la live, magari faccio un'eccezione per dopo la serata iscritti e followers, d'accordo ragazzi? Che di solito non c'è il gameplay dopo, evito oggi e magari lo facciamo domenica, d'accordo? Bene ragazzi, io vi saluto qui, grazie a tutti per essere stati in live, noi ci vediamo molto presto, mi raccomando, come sempre, se ancora non l'avete fatto, seguitemi qui su Twitch, pigiate quel bel cuoricino, abbonatevi con Twitch Prime se ne avete la possibilità, che aiuta davvero tantissimo il canale. Seguitemi anche sui social come Instagram, Telegram e TikTok, dove c'è la community, dove andiamo in live praticamente tutti i giorni. Supportate il canale tramite i vari link affiliati come Amazon, Instant Gaming, tramite il Patreon, e iscrivetevi anche ai miei 2 canali YouTube, trovate tutti i link qui sotto tramite il bot in chat. D'accordo gente? A presto.